The headlines around Sean Combs, P. Diddy, they're just everywhere right now. But it's really the testimony of his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, that's demanding attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't just like another celebrity story playing out.
No, not at all.
We've got this YouTube transcript from the Law and Crime Network covering her time actually on the stand. And it's revealing some incredibly complex and frankly pretty disturbing allegations. What can we really, learn from digging into this source?
Exactly. And I mean, our goal with this deep dive, it isn't just to rehash those headlines you mentioned.
Right.
It's really to unpack what this specific courtroom testimony shows us about the core allegations. Yeah. And the likely legal strategies that are in play.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, the kind of deeper context it gives us on the dynamics within these alleged domestic violence situations. We really want to equip you with a thorough, but still, digestible understanding of what's actually coming out in court.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So let's maybe start by unpacking a concept that domestic violence experts often talk about. It seems to line up pretty closely with Cassie Ventura's testimony.
Yeah.
This idea of the cycle of violence.
Yes, the cycle of violence. And what's really striking here is how the experts cited in the transcript describe this cycle. It's not just like one bad incident. It's described as a recurring pattern. It has these distinct phases. So first you've got the violent act itself.
Okay.
Then very often there's an apology, maybe a kind of honeymoon period. This is where the abuser might show remorse, offer gifts, affection, promise it won't happen again.
That manipulation part.
Exactly. But then, sort of inevitably, tension starts to build up again, leading to another violent incident, and the cycle just repeats.
Wow.
And what makes it so, effective in trapping victims is that psychological piece you mentioned, the alternating between affection and abuse. It creates so much confusion and dependence.
And this cycle, it seems to be directly mirrored in what Ventura alleges she went through. The transcript actually mentions these blood contributions, these displays of affection, material gifts, that reportedly came after instances of abuse. It's almost like attempts to keep her there, keep her in the relationship, and maybe crucially, keep her quiet.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about how effective those kinds of tactics can be over time.
Definitely.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually pretty significant that even Combs's own defense attorneys, in their opening statements, acknowledged that there was domestic violence within the relationship.
Oh, interesting. They admitted that up front.
That admission, I mean, it speaks volumes. It suggests they aren't necessarily disputing that violence occurred, but maybe disputing the nature of it, the extent, the context around it.
So maybe framing it differently.
Possibly. It raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Does acknowledging some violence maybe allow them to try and frame subsequent acts within that honeymoon phase of the cycle we just talked about?
That's a thought. Okay, so this is where it gets really intense and honestly quite disturbing. The testimony included some very graphic details and photographic evidence, too.
Yes.
Apparently, the prosecution showed photos taken from Ventura's own phone showing her alleged injuries. That kind of visual evidence must be incredibly impactful in court, right?
Oh, absolutely. Visuals like that can be very powerful for a jury. The transcript specifically mentions one incident in Toronto. Ventura testified she had to use her hair, strategically position it to cover a bruise near her eye.
Wow.
And then there's the alleged incident in the Hamptons, which involves some particularly troubling details.
Right. Okay, this part it's a lot to take in. The testimony describes Combs allegedly wanting what she called a freak-off, which apparently led to them getting a hotel room and bringing in an escort named Dave. Ventura claims she took GHB.
Yes.
And experienced a blackout. She actually used the term G-hole, which I understand is like slang for the effects of GHB, that disorientation.
Right, that incapacitating effect.
Yeah. And she says she woke up naked in the shower with Combs and Dave, and her quote was basically, "I bugged out, it wasn't pretty." I mean, just trying to imagine the distress of waking up to that.
It's incredibly disturbing to contemplate. And what's significant here is the sequence of events she describes after that. She testified that after speaking with a friend of Combs, another freak-off happened.
Another one.
That's what she testified. And then the prosecution presented a photograph showing her eyebrow about a week later. It apparently showed a permanent scar, which she attributes directly to that Hamptons incident.
So lasting physical evidence.
Exactly. That visual evidence of a permanent injury, it adds another layer to her account.
And it just doesn't stop there, does it? The transcript also details an alleged incident at the Cannes Film Festival. Combs supposedly accused her of taking drugs, allegedly threw her off his boat.
Off the boat.
Yeah. And get this, her passport was still on the boat. But somehow, she still had to attend a red carpet event later that same night.
That is quite something. Being allegedly thrown off a boat and then having to appear publicly at a high-profile event.
It's almost unbelievable. It really highlights the kind of pressure and maybe control she must have felt she was under.
It paints a picture, doesn't it, of someone potentially in a highly controlled, highly volatile situation. That juxtaposition, the alleged private abuse, and the required public appearance, it really underscores the complexity and the potential for manipulation in those dynamics.
Then later, on a commercial flight back to New York, things allegedly took another really disturbing turn.
Okay.
Ventura testified that even after she switched seats to get away from Combs on the plane, he actually traded his seat to sit next to her again.
Wow.
And then, she says, he showed her freak-off videos on his laptop, videos presumably of her, and allegedly threatened to release them.
Using potential blackmail.
Yeah. That alleged use of such personal, potentially compromising material as a threat. It's kind of chilling, isn't it?
Yep. It really is. This alleged use of video as potential blackmail, it's a significant detail. It speaks to a pattern of control and intimidation that she claims she endured throughout the relationship.
So, okay, given all these disturbing details from the testimony, the alleged pattern, the photographic evidence, what kind of defense strategy can Combs' legal team even realistically use to counter claims like these?
Well, the legal experts discuss in the transcript, they anticipate the defense will likely try to portray Ventura as someone who, benefited significantly from the relationship.
The quid pro quo angle, sorta.
Something like that. Mentioning her music career, modeling opportunities, other perks that came with being with him. The underlying strategy seems to be suggesting that her involvement in these sexual activities was consensual, or at the very least, not entirely coerced.
Right.
It's a common tactic in these kinds of cases, unfortunately. Trying to undermine the accuser's credibility by focusing on perceived benefits or inconsistencies in their story.
Yeah, the transcript definitely highlights that potential defense argument, questioning whether she was actually forced into sex with others or if she participated, of her own volition.
Exactly.
It feels like a really difficult line for them to walk, though, doesn't it? Given the power dynamics she described in her testimony, doesn't that risk sounding insensitive to the jury? I mean, how might a jury perceive that kind of argument?
It's a very delicate balance for the defense, absolutely. They have to cross-examine her, and they probably need to acknowledge her pregnancy, her past experiences, things that humanize her to the jury.
Right.
But at the same time, they need to raise questions about her motives, the timing of these allegations, and especially that huge $50 million lawsuit she initially filed.
That will definitely come up.
Oh, for sure. That will likely be a key point of contention for them. They'll probably try to suggest her actions were driven, at least in part, by financial gain, rather than purely a desire for justice.
And the defense, they'll also likely point to the timeline, right? The fact that she left the relationship back in 2018 and then subsequently got married and, at least from the outside, appeared to be living a happy life, quote unquote, before filing this lawsuit years later.
Yes, that timeline will undoubtedly be scrutinized. They'll use it to potentially question the sort of immediacy and severity of the alleged trauma she described.
Okay. Now, the transcript also touched on a question that I think a lot of people listening might have. Why haven't other people who allegedly, facilitated or covered up for Combs, why haven't they been charged? Seems kind of unlikely he acted totally alone if these allegations hold water.
That's a really fair question, and if these allegations are true, you do have to wonder about the potential involvement or at least knowledge of others around him.
Right.
What's interesting here is the explanation given around prosecutorial strategy. The government, especially the feds, has significant power. They can grant immunity to potential witnesses. In exchange for cooperation, that's often a crucial tool for building cases in these complex investigations. It can incentivize people who have relevant information to come forward when they might otherwise be hesitant.
Makes sense.
The transcript also mentions the impact of federal law enforcement, like the FBI, being involved. Their presence can be highly intimidating to potential defense witnesses, which could also influence who's willing to testify and what they say.
So the power of the investigation itself. It's also noted in the material we looked at that it's kind of unusual for a RICO charge, like the one reportedly being considered or investigated here, to be against just a single individual without unnamed co-defendants listed.
Yes, that is flagged as somewhat unusual.
What are the potential, legal complexities or maybe weaknesses that could create for the prosecution's case?
Well, it potentially opens up an avenue for the defense. They might argue that, look, many individuals, maybe even including Ventura herself at times, were aware of or perhaps even participated in some of the alleged activities. And the fact that these other individuals haven't been named as co-defendants, that could raise questions about the whole narrative the prosecution is presenting. The defense could try to frame them as enablers, implying some level of consent or at least complicity from others.
Okay, that's complex. Let's shift gears slightly and address something that often comes up in cases of alleged abuse. The question of why didn't she just leave earlier? You hear that a lot.
You do.
From the outside, it seems like an obvious solution, maybe. But the reality is often just so much more complicated.
That's such a crucial point, and the transcript rightly emphasizes this. Leaving an abusive relationship is rarely immediate. It's rarely straightforward. It depends on so many factors. The victim's emotional readiness, for one, their safety concerns. I mean, statistically, the most dangerous time for a victim is often when they try to leave.
Right. The risk escalates.
Exactly. And then there's financial independence or lack thereof. It's just not a simple matter of willpower. They're often very real barriers.
And the transcript connects Ventura's decision to come forward later, connects it with the experiences of other survivors in those big high-profile cases like Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
It also mentions the Adult Survivors Act. How do these sort of broader movements and legal changes actually influence someone's decision to finally speak out, maybe years later?
Well, if you think about the bigger picture, seeing other survivors come forward, especially in prominent cases, it can create a powerful sense of solidarity. It can empower others who've had similar experiences. It can also shift societal perceptions, maybe making it feel safer or more likely that a victim will actually be believed.
Creates a different environment.
Precisely. And laws like the Adult Survivors Act, they're specifically designed to recognize that trauma takes time. They provide a window, a chance for survivors to bring legal claims, even after the usual time limits, the statutes of limitations, have expired. Because it acknowledges that the psychological impact of abuse can take years, sometimes decades, to process and feel ready to address legally. The transcript really stresses that point. Emotional healing from abuse, it's not linear, it's not a straight path. It can take a significant amount of time.
So just to kind of wrap things up here, we've really dug into the core allegations from Cassie Ventura's testimony, looked at the graphic evidence presented, the defense strategies we might expect to see, the government's perspective on witness cooperation, and these incredibly complex dynamics that often keep people trapped in abusive relationships. It's certainly, it's a lot to consider.
It really is. We've seen how the testimony, as presented in the source, reveals this disturbing alleged pattern of abuse, control, and intimidation. And we've also touched on the legal hurdles involved navigating graphic evidence, anticipating those defense arguments about consent and motive. It's complicated territory.
Absolutely. So this deep dive, it kind of leaves us, and you listening, with maybe a final provocative thought to mull over. When you consider all this detailed and often very disturbing testimony, alongside the complex legal maneuvers being discussed, what does this case ultimately reveal about power dynamics, within relationships, and about the often very difficult, very long pursuit of justice when such serious allegations finally come to light?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the path to accountability, doesn't it? And just how complex that path can be in situations like these.